Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to decorate a gorgeous heart-shaped cake. There are a few tips and tricks to bear in mind, so I'm going to show you exactly how to do them. So I've actually baked a heart-shaped sponge in a heart-shaped tin like this. I'll link this tin to the description box below. But if you want to just cut out your own shape, then that's absolutely fine. But just to tell you quantities, it's 1.5 my regular 6-inch cake recipe. Again, I'll write all the quantities below as well, but I wanted it nice and full because it's much easier just owning one of these tins rather than baking everything in two. But I am gonna start off in the same way I usually do and cutting the top off this sponge. So whether your cake has domed or it's just got this crust like this, I like chopping that off to get a nice even surface. So it's a little bit confusing when it's a shaped cake because usually, well, especially I'm used to cutting a round cake, but the technique is exactly the same. I'm gonna hold the knife just under the surface. Obviously the knife's not going to hit all the corners just yet, but the rotation is what keeps the cake straight. So I'm gonna make my way all around the cake and then start cutting more towards the center, still rotating the cake. And obviously being careful not to destroy the shape of the cake too. So I just need to go a little bit lower, but now I can see where I'm cutting. I can go straight on with my knife, just get rid of those final crummy areas. A little crumbs left on there, but I'm not worried about that. At this point, I just want it straight. Now I'm gonna cut this in half. I personally prefer that these cakes have 2 thicker layers rather than cutting too many layers, and also it's easier to keep the shape. But if you wanna cut it into 3 layers, that's absolutely fine. It's just easier cutting it into 2. So I'm gonna see where halfway is, drag my knife around the cake, and start cutting. And hopefully result in 2 even layers. Pretty even, I'm impressed with that. Now, as always, I want to make sure that the layer that was touching the tin is going to be the top of the cake. So that's gonna be the second piece I go on with. This is gonna be the first. And now I can fill and crumb cake the cake as usual. So even though this cake isn't a round cake, I still need my turntable, and I'm going to fill and crumb coat and then eventually decorate it as I would usually. So turntable with my cake board, a palette knife and side scraper. And I've got some of my Swiss meringue buttercream here, which you can find the recipe for on my channel. So to start, I want to make sure that this cake is nice and secured to the board. So I'm going to pipe some buttercream where I think the heart is going to sit, and then place it on top of the buttercream and squeeze it down. So I'm using a square shaped board for this. I think it fits the heart best, and also it will eventually go into a box. But any board that you're using is absolutely fine, as long as you've got room around the edge to decorate it. So now I'm going to fill the cake using the buttercream by piping a layer around the edge, following the shape of the cake, and then eventually filling the center with buttercream. So this is where the slightly different tricky part comes in. Usually I would use my palette knife and turntable to rotate the cake like this to get a nice even circular surface. However, because it's a heart shape, I'm still gonna do the same action, but I'm just gonna be wary of where the shape is. For example, I'm still going to use that side of my palette knife and the turntable to get an overall even layer of buttercream. But the second I start to see it spreading too much or over the edges or filling in creases that I don't want it to be, I'm going to be more careful. So I'm going to start off in the same way, but already I can feel that it's pushing too much around the crease of the top of the heart. So I'm now going to start just bringing it inwards and try and maintain a flat surface doing this motion. Now I can actually see it's a little bit lower here, so I'll put on some more cream here. So I'm kind of using a combination of what I would usually do. This rotating action, especially around the center, actually works really well. But then bringing it in from the sides. Now you want an overall flat layer of buttercream, which I have. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, because I'm going on with the second layer of cake anyway, and pressing it down will even it out. And this is where I need to line it up as even as possible. Checking on every corner that it's even, and this is why I prefer doing 2 layers, because otherwise you'd have to do this again. That looks good to me. And now for the crumb coat. I'm going to add some extra buttercream around the side of the cake like I usually would. Some at the very base, just to make sure that's all filled in. And then a squiggle on the top. And the process is exactly the same for the crumb coat. I just want to secure all those crumbs inside this thin layer of buttercream. So I'm going to use my palette knife starting on the top and spreading that out. Again, using the turntable, going backwards and forwards with my palette knife until I get a nice even thin layer of buttercream. And any excess from the top, I can start moving towards the edge and down the sides. Now I'm still going to do the over action that I usually would and spread that buttercream around the sides of the cake, around the curved areas. So I've got an overall thin layer of buttercream. Now I want to start building up the heart shape again because it's got a little bit lost with this layer. So firstly on the top, I want to get that extremely thin now and follow the shape of the cake. So I could do that rotating action and wipe off any excess into a bowl. That's got crumbs in, so don't mix that up with your clean buttercream. And then like I did when I was filling up the cake, just drag the palette knife to make sure it really forms that heart shape. And now scrape away the excess. So depending on what shape you have, the more corners you're gonna have. Luckily this heart only has 1, and it's this bit here. So I just wanna be wary of it. But the angle of the scraper is exactly the same as a normal cake. You want to be about 45 degrees away from the cake and make it as straight as possible in that corner and up again. Now, I've already got quite a build up on my scraper, so I'll scrape that away. And especially for shaped cakes, you want to use the shape of the cake to your advantage. You don't want to be adding too much buttercream on here, otherwise you'll change the shape of the cake. So I'm nearly done. I just want to define this crease a little bit more. So I'm just going to go over this exact part a couple of times, making sure there's not too much buttercream there. See, I've still got extra. There, that's better. And now I'm going to clean off the top just like I usually would, cleaning my palette knife, going from the outside in, patching that excess buttercream, and cleaning on my scraper every time. Careful around the sharper corners. And that is a perfectly crumb-coated heart-shaped cake. So as usual, this is going to go into the freezer for 15 minutes or the fridge for half an hour until this layer is completely set before going on with a second layer of buttercream. So the crumb coat is set, so we can go straight on with a second coating. So what I've done is I've actually colored some buttercream purple, which I'm going to put around the whole cake. And especially for a shaped cake, you want to be using a piping bag because you need that equal amount around the whole cake, no matter what shape it is. As always, I'm going to start at the very bottom and push a generous amount through that piping bag. And I'm using the turntable rather than my hand to make my way all around the cake. Once I've done one row, I'm going to do the exact same thing above it, keeping that thickness the same. Nice and slowly. You don't want to rush this bit because you want to keep that shape of the cake. And continue until I get to the top of the cake. All the sides are nice and full. Now I'm going to fill the top. Now the top doesn't have to be as thick as the sides were, but I just want an even covering, especially to hide the cake underneath. So before I go on the scraper, I want to make sure that this buttercream coating is even. So I'm going to start at the top with my palette knife and do that similar motion as I was filling up the cake. So do a combination of turning the turntable as well as going backwards and forwards, but I'm really conscious now, I don't want to be ruining the shape of the heart. So I kind of follow around where the top of the heart is, and I'm going to keep going until it's nice and even. So just finishing off like I did when I was filling up the cake, using the side of the palette knife and bringing that buttercream inwards to get that top nice and smooth. So that does take some time. I'm not going to be touching the top again because I'm going to be cutting off the top corners, and you'll see that in a moment. So I wanted it as flat as possible. However, I think this is really important to remember and tell yourself is that we're only human, and if there is one air bubble or one palette knife stroke, it's okay. I personally think it adds this handmade touch to the cake. As long as the majority have gone, it's fine. And for me, this is fine. It's nice and flat, and that's what I wanted. Now I'm going to focus on the sides using my side scraper. Obviously, when you're going around a round cake, it's a constant movement and you don't need to use your hand holding the scraper that much. However, I need to be really careful here not to ruin the shape of the cake or go too thin in places. So I'm going to go on really, really carefully at first. Same angle, same pressure as I usually would, but go much slower and really follow the shape of the cake. And I'm not going to take off my scraper for a while. I'm going to let that buttercream even out on its own before I take anything off. So into the crease and around again. What I want to make sure is that this scraper stays nice and straight, and so the buttercream stays straight too. Now, I've got quite a build-up on my scraper, which I want to get rid of, and do the same action. Up one side, around into the crease, and then around the second side. Now, especially with a heart, I know I said you've only got one area to think about, which is this crease at the top, but you do actually want a sharper point at the bottom. So now I'm going to divide the heart in two. I'm just going to do one side and then the other. So I'm going to start at this crease, then focus around one side. And then when I reach the end, I'm going to come off. Now it obviously leaves this little bit of buttercream, but I'll catch that on my next movement. As I come on, I'm going to catch that excess of buttercream, go round the second side, into the crease, and carefully come off. And keep repeating until I'm happy with the edges. There, a nice, even, straight coating around the outside. Like I said, I'm not too worried about all of this excess buttercream coming upwards because this is gonna go back in the fridge to harden, which I'm then gonna chop off the corners. You can, if you wanted, to clean them off with a palette knife now, but I find with shaped cakes, it's just easier to cut them once the buttercream is hard. So there we go, into the fridge until it's hardened. So like I said, I left this second layer of buttercream to firm up, including these corners which are firm enough to cut off. So I've got a small knife here, and I'm very carefully just going to go round the top and trim those excess corners off. And scrape any of the excess buttercream into a bowl. And this is definitely the best way to get sharp corners, not so much in general, but especially with a shaped cake. I'm just going to go around the whole outside and trim those off. For this cake in particular, I'm not too worried about the very edges being 100% perfect because I am going to be decorating this cake with lots of pipe details, and I can hide anything. So now's the fun part. I'm gonna go over with some various piping details which I've already covered in some of my tutorials. So if you want some more in-depth explanation on what different piping tips do, then head over to my channel. But for this, I've got a selection of white and purple buttercream, different piping tips, And I'm just gonna do a beautiful piped detail decoration. So first, a petal tip to do some beautiful ruffles around the edges. And I'm just moving the piping bag up and down. And accentuate that heart shape. And let's get some big scrolls going. So up and down, following the border of the cake. And a little white one to break up. So similar ruffles around the bottom of the cake. And some more scrolls above the ruffles. So now I'm just going to mark out where I'm going to do some loops and ruffle in between. Breathe. And some pipe details to finish that off. These look like little bows. So the more I do these piped cakes, the more I fall in love with them, and I really like it on a shaped cake too. I think the detail of the piping really brings out the shape, so it's a good way to decorate one of them. So I'm nearly finished. I'm just gonna finish off with some pearly sprinkles and then obviously a touch of glitter. Got some larger pearls to sit around the bottom. And some more on top. And to finish off, a touch of magic, my edible glitter. Beautiful! I love this cake. When it's my birthday, I'm gonna make a larger version, I think. So there we go. There's my first shaped cake that I've done on my channel. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if there are other tutorials that you want to see, because this did actually come from one of your suggestions, so I hope it helped. As usual, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment below with anything else you'd like to see. I will see you soon with more tutorials.